birthday dinner and declared I wasn't worthy of carrying our family name, the entire room went dead silent. My brother clapped, grinning like he'd just won the lottery, while my cousins smirked into their champagne. They all thought this was the moment I'd finally break, pack my bags, and disappear into poverty. For years, my dad had treated me like an outsider because I chose hard, honest blue-collar work over his corrupt corporate empire. He thought disowning me publicly would ruin my life. But then, the room grew even colder. My quiet, legendary grandpa slowly stood up from the head of the table. He looked at my dad, then at my brother, and smiled a dangerous smile. What he did next didn't just change my life. It completely dismantled my dad's multi-million-dollar world. My name is Lana, and at 27 years old, I've never been the kind of woman who fits into a perfectly polished mold. While the rest of my family spent their days in climate-controlled high-rise offices wearing designer suits, I found my purpose out in the real world. I work in industrial logistics, managing heavy-duty shipping lanes and supply chains. If you saw me on a regular Tuesday, I'd be wearing heavy work boots, a bright, high-visibility vest, and protective safety glasses over my messy hair. To my father, Richard, and my younger brother, Julian, my career was an absolute embarrassment, a stain on our prestigious corporate heritage. They honestly believed that getting dirty at a job site meant you lacked intelligence and class. But tonight wasn't about their fragile egos. It was Grandpa Arthur's 80th birthday, and I had raced straight from a grueling 12-hour shift at the logistics yard to make it to the high-end restaurant downtown. I didn't even have time to change out of my practical clothes, though I did my best to clean off the dust before walking into the private dining room. Grandpa Arthur was the true heart of this family. He was a quiet, observant man, and the actual mastermind who had founded the foundational wealth my father now flaunted. As I slipped into my seat at the long, mahogany table, the contrast was blinding. I was surrounded by a sea of tailored fabrics, sparkling diamonds, and cold, judgmental eyes. My father sneered at my clothes, and Julian smirked, whispering something to his cousin. I ignored them, focusing instead on Grandpa, who gave me a warm, reassuring wink from the head of the table. The tension in the room simmered just beneath the surface until the main course was served. My father, Richard, stood up, clinking his crystal glass with a silver spoon to draw everyone's attention. I expected a heartfelt tribute to Grandpa Arthur's decades of hard work and leadership, but as my father's cold eyes locked directly onto me, the atmosphere shifted instantly. He didn't talk about his father's incredible milestone. Instead, he used this grand family platform to publicly air his long-standing grievances against his own daughter. He spoke loudly, his voice echoing off the restaurant's private walls, criticizing my lifestyle, my blue-collar career, and what he called my absolute failure to uphold the family's elite social standing. The climax of his toxic speech came with a brutal, calculated finality. He announced right then and there that I was being completely cut out of the family assets, stripped of my inheritance, and entirely removed from any future association with the family legacy. He leaned forward, smirking across the white tablecloth, and delivered the devastating words, "You don't deserve to carry our last name." The cruelty of the moment was sharp, intentional, and meant to break me. Instantly, my brother, Julian, began to loudly clap, a smug, triumphant grin stretching across his face. He had been waiting for this day for years, eager to see me completely erased from the financial equation, so he could claim it all. The rest of our cousins and relatives sat back, whispering and smirking into their champagne glasses, offering absolutely no defense for me. A heavy, suffocating silence followed the applause. Everyone in the room turned their heads toward my seat, staring intently, completely expecting me to burst into tears, fall apart, and run out of the restaurant in absolute humiliation. That heavy, suffocating silence gripped the room like a vice. I kept my chin up and forced myself to lock eyes with my father, refusing to give them the sick satisfaction of seeing a single tear roll down my face. Julian was still grinning, practically vibrating with excitement in his seat, while my father slowly raised his wine glass to take a sip, thoroughly enjoying his public execution of my dignity. He really thought he had won. But the triumphant, arrogant atmosphere they had manufactured didn't last long. From the head of the table, the heavy scraping of a wooden chair broke the quiet. Grandpa Arthur slowly stood up. At 80 years old, he still possessed a quiet, towering gravity that demanded absolute respect from everyone in the industry. The room seemed to grow even colder as his sharp, unyielding eyes swept over my father and brother. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely disgusted by their behavior. He turned his gaze directly to me, and then, right there in front of everyone, he delivered the ultimate counterblow. Then she'll carry mine and everything that comes with it. In an instant, Julian's smug smile completely vanished from his face. The color drained from his skin, and his jaw practically hit the floor. He stammered out, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "No, Grandpa, you can't do this to me." My father froze, his wine glass hovering halfway to his mouth, realizing the gravity of what had just occurred. Before I tell you how Grandpa utterly destroyed their plans, I want to take a quick moment to welcome all of you. City you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. Trust me, the corporate battlefield was about to get incredibly intense. Grandpa Arthur remained standing, his quiet presence entirely commanding the silent room. My father tried to chuckle nervously, attempting to dismiss the statement as an old man's emotional whim, but Grandpa silenced him with a single, icy look. He calmly adjusted his jacket and revealed a massive secret that my father had desperately hidden from the rest of the family for over a decade. The entire corporate empire they flaunted actually relied entirely on a foundational logistics and landholding company. Richard and Julian only managed the front-facing retail branch, while the core infrastructure, the shipping warehouses, and the very land their executive offices sat upon remained entirely under Grandpa's legal ownership and name. Grandpa looked around the table at the stunned, pale faces of our relatives. He explained that because my father openly rejected my worth and threw me out of the family, he was bypassing Richard entirely. He announced that he had already instructed his private legal team to execute an immediate inheritance shift. Through a special legal provision, Grandpa was changing my legal last name back to his mother's original, elite lineage, a name that carried immense historical and financial weight in the global trade industry. Furthermore, he declared he was signing over 100% of those foundational infrastructure assets directly to me. My industrial logistics background wasn't an embarrassment to Grandpa. It was the exact practical skill set needed to run the core of the empire. By trying to strip me of a name, my father had inadvertently forced Grandpa to hand me the keys to the entire kingdom. Julian looked physically sick, realizing that the sister they had just publicly humiliated was now technically their landlord and the most powerful asset holder in the family. In the days following that explosive birthday dinner, the luxury high-rise offices fell into complete chaos, and the story shifted entirely to the frantic aftermath. My father, Richard, and my brother, Julian, completely lost their corporate composure. The arrogant men who had sneered at my practical clothes and industrial work boots were now desperately blowtorching my phone with endless text messages and phone calls. They even went so far as to show up at my logistics yard, driving their expensive sports cars into the dusty gravel lot, frantically begging me for a private meeting to force some kind of family compromise before it ruined them. But I didn't face them alone. I was now working side by side with Grandpa Arthur's elite, private team of corporate attorneys. As we began digging deep into the operational records of the front-facing retail branch that my father managed, we uncovered a dark, systemic secret. Richard and Julian hadn't just been arrogant. They had been deeply, systematically corrupt. Over the past 3 years, believing Grandpa was too old and detached to notice, they had been executing severe financial mismanagement and setting up fraudulent shell company transfers. They were systematically siphoning millions of dollars from Grandpa's original, protected infrastructure funds to cover up massive losses in their own failing personal corporate ventures. The discovery changed everything. It wasn't just about an inheritance anymore. It was about criminal liability. By reviewing the audited bank statements and transaction receipts, Grandpa's legal team and I realized we now held total, absolute leverage over them. I had the legal power to immediately freeze their operational lines, evict their retail business from our land, and completely bankrupt my father's firm overnight. Or, even worse for them, I could hand the entire forensic file over to federal investigators and press formal charges for corporate fraud, elder abuse, and grand larceny. The tables hadn't just turned. I had built an entirely new table. The moment of reckoning finally arrived at the family corporate headquarters. I walked through the heavy glass doors into the main executive conference room, completely bypassing the security guards who now answered directly to my legal team. I wasn't wearing a designer dress or trying to look like a traditional corporate executive. Instead, I walked in holding a sleek leather folder packed with the audited financial data and forensic accounting reports. My father and Julian were already seated at the table, looking completely defeated, pale, and visibly trembling as my attorneys took their places beside me. With absolute precision, my legal team laid out the undeniable evidence of their shell company transfers and systematic fraud. The arrogance that Richard and Julian had displayed at the birthday dinner was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, suffocating fear of public ruin and long prison sentences. Julian looked like he was about to throw up, and my father couldn't even look me in the eye. I leaned across the table, looking at the two men who had tried to destroy me just days prior, and gave them a very simple, non-negotiable ultimatum. To avoid immediate federal prosecution and a guaranteed public prison sentence, they had to sign the restructuring documents we had prepared. These legal papers stripped them of all voting power, absolute control of the family's financial destiny and corporate operations. They tried to beg. My father stammered about family loyalty, and Julian pleaded for his career, but I remained completely unmoved. They hadn't cared about family when they tried to humiliate me in front of everyone. Left with zero legal options and staring down the barrel of a major criminal indictment, they picked up the pens with shaking hands and signed everything away, effectively handing me total control. 3 months later, the dust has finally settled. I successfully stabilized the core logistics business, streamlined the supply lines, and firmly protected Grandpa Arthur's true legacy from corporate ruin. My father and Julian were quietly and permanently removed from their executive roles. They are now forced to live on modest, heavily restricted stipends, far away from the power they once abused. They wanted to strip me of a name, but instead, their own greed caused them to lose their entire empire. What would you have done if your own father tried to publicly? And meanwhile, if you love stories of sweet justice and clever revenge, I'm leaving on the final screen